I believe we are live. Welcome everyone. Back after 2 weeks gone. I apologize for that, but I was out. Boy, I had a convention 2 weeks ago, and then I caught some con crud. Never fun. And that was something that just nailed me to my bed for last Friday. Just no way I could do the thing, unfortunately. Such is life. Kind of frustrating, but we are back. We are live. We're doing all of the fun anime and manga things. And while we wait for folks to filter in on the chat, let's go ahead and get to the news, because news is always interesting to talk about. Let me go ahead and pull up my details just so I have details. Oh, and I wanted to actually, before I do that, let me go ahead and pull. I had some videos. I just wanted to make sure I had it locally. I'm not trying to play those from the backup. That's weird. Why isn't it letting me see that? Having some weird network issues. There we go. Just taking a while for it to find itself. News video. There we go. And I think those will just go into here for now. Good. And so then we can pull in. So that was that. That is that. Okay. And let me just pull in stuff so I know what I'm talking about. That's helpful, right? You know what you're talking about? Oh, interesting. I don't have, okay. Source. You didn't quite expect that. News clip 1. And we will pull in that. Alright, so hopefully that will work. And then we want the, what is the, okay, good. So we will add another one. And pull that in. Okay. We'll put that in where it belongs. Good. So I think we're all ready to go on that. Good. Just takes a minute to find everything. And we're sure we have the right, yeah. All right, let's get started with the news. And welcome to the latest anime and manga news for the week ending. This is February 16th, 2018. Also including a few notes from the week before, because I was out that week. Starting with news of a new anime announced. Announced a little bit further, but got some more information now. New anime series called Magical Girl Sight, which is an adaptation of a manga. It will be coming out. Do we have a name? It'll be a 12-episode anime series. Will premiere in April, so coming up next anime season. And I believe I have a clip that I wanted to show. And we will see if we can't get that to work.
私たちがアニメになるかもしれません。
Apologies, audio cut out there for a little bit, so let's go back and fix that. So as I was mentioning, Magical Girl Sight looks like it is more of a Madoka Magica kind of a concept in terms of being a magical girl series with a very dark feel to it. So we'll see what that is going to be. It should be coming up pretty soon. Like I said, in April, it'll be premiering on the Animeism block, but also Amazon Prime Video will be carrying it inside and outside of Japan. So if you have Amazon Prime Video, you should be able to watch this 12-episode series directed by Tadahito Matsubayashi of Tokyo Ghoul Pinto, directing this at Production Doa. So good news there. More anime. Yay. Moving on to what must be a lighter anime series, It's My Life. This is a series interesting because it was crowdfunded, or it's being crowdfunded. There is a crowdfunding project to get a 3-minute anime video plus ending, and the crowdfunding is still ongoing. Plenty more money coming, or potential to come in, because we still have about 77 days remaining as of, as of about a week ago. So still has about 2 months to go on that, and further stretch goals for more and more video content. But that's a very, very cool thing. And I'll show you a promo video here in a moment. It is being directed by Hisayoshi Hirasawa of Miss Bernard Said, and Oji-san to Marshmallow at Studio Creators in Pack, who worked on Levels Like a Cocktail, Kitaro's Yokai Picture Diary, and Miss Bernard Said. So they do a lot of these, short ONA style anime series. It is about a guy who's retiring from his job as a knight, finally gets a house, gonna retire early to his quiet domestic life, and then this young witch crash lands into his home, and he ends up taking her on as like a servant. So let's watch a bit of that.
Oh.
アストラ様、大変なんです。
Audio keeps kicking out. I apologize, guys. Let's go back. I need to just stop doing that. All right, let me re-go back to what we were talking about before. So sorry. So as you can see, cute, fun anime series. It's My Life there. As I may have mentioned, it is being directed by Hisayoshi Hirasawa of Miss Bernard Said and Oji-san to Marshmallow. And he is directing at, who is directing at Creators in Pack, the studio behind Levels Like a Cocktail and Miss Bernard Said. So an ONA anime studio. They certainly know how to do these things. Not clear yet what form this is going to take. OVA, short film, series, no idea. It might just be a single little short film, who knows. But more anime, good thing. All right, let's actually move on here. There's going to be a very edited down thing when we actually get to it. So Crunchyroll did recently an interview with a Hollywood Reporter where they said that they've contributed over 100 million US dollars to the Japanese anime industry. So in terms of all their licensing fees over the last decade or so that they have been legit, they have sent that much over to the anime industry. I'm sure that also counts the co-productions they're doing with the anime industry. So they co-produce shows like A Place Further in the Universe and Citrus and How to Keep a Mummy and Laid Back Camp and stuff like that. So certainly they're very involved. But yeah, a lot of money flowing over there to the anime industry through Crunchyroll, which is a good thing. As of February of last year, they have more than 1 million subscribers, and we know there are more than 20 million registered users on the site. So definitely big, still a huge thing in the industry. All right, moving on, a bit of licensing news. The Persona 5 anime has been licensed by Aniplex USA. Certainly one of the bigger anime-themed games of the past year. Got an anime series, and so it has been licensed. Streaming details will be coming soon. No other news there. There is an English subbed trailer up on Aniplex of America's site if you want to check that out. It'll premiere in April on Tokyo MX, Gunma TV, and other channels. The voice cast members from the game are reprising their roles in the anime series. So if you like the game, you'll definitely get that stuff in the anime series. Directed by Masashi Ishihama, who worked on From the New World and Kami-Chu, directing there, with the, let's see here, with some adaptation of the character designs, obviously. And the writer on Hayate the Combat Butler, Skep Dance, and Persona 5 the Animation The Day Breakers will also be in charge of the series scripts. So good news there. And the same composer from the game on the anime series. So the upcoming Persona 5 anime, licensed by Aniplex. And we will see where that will end up. Moving on to some news about the live-action Sword Art Online project. The series has been sold to Netflix, and they were very, very, very clear that they're going to cast Asian actors as Kirito and Asuna. And it's kind of funny because there's this big thing by the series writer and executive producer Laeta Kalogridis. I apologize if I'm messing up that name. Working on Altered Carbon. You know, there's a long thing about how this is a very Japanese project, and we're not going to do the thing that they did in Ghost in the Shell, and we're not going to whitewash it, and they're going to be Asian actors. They didn't say Japanese actors, but they make this big deal about them being Japanese, but they very clearly say Asian actors. So we'll see where that ends up. But it's a little odd of a statement. Like if you're going to be really big about, ethnicity. They said now, obviously, other characters in the show are not all Japanese. They're from different parts of the world, so they'll be cast appropriately to their potential, region. So that's fine. But it's kind of an odd mixed message there in that story. So who knows where that's going on? But it is sold to Netflix, which is good on that. So who knows where that'll end up? But hey, at least more news on that. Moving on to some slightly more somber news. We now know that Aya Hisakawa will be taking over the role of Bulma in Dragon Ball Super after Hiromi Tsuru, the previous voice actor behind the role, passed away. And she's already recorded the dialogue for the 128th episode of Dragon Ball Super. And they have already announced, Toei Animation's already announced that they plan on using Aya Hisakawa in the future for Bulma, not just for Dragon Ball Super. So the torch has been passed on to Aya Hisakawa. Also, finally, also sad news, Hiroki Takagi, famous animator, has passed away suddenly. He had the flu and apparently lost consciousness while taking a bath and passed away. Legendary animator, worked on Creamy Mami, Project Eiko, Miyazaki Koku, Akira, Evangelion, My Dear Marie, Dominion Tank Police, Kimagure Orange Road, Bleach, Big Order, and he was working on Space Battleship Yamato 2199. I mean, he was still working as an animator when he passed away just this in the past couple of weeks. So sad to hear. Passed away on February 2nd, so about 2 weeks ago. So yes, sad news. And I hope he is living it up with other animators up there in animator heaven, not having to draw constantly. So anyway, that's all the news for this week, in the past 2 weeks indeed. Thank you all for joining me. And we will have more news for you next week. All right. So hello chat. Apologies for the audio problems. Yeah, Crunchyroll was totally a pirate site, 10 years ago. Like all the others who decided to go legit. And I'd love to hear the story behind that, about what they did, who decided to do that, and how they negotiated and why they did all that stuff. Good on them, but it's certainly not the path most pirates take when they're doing this site. And a path that most pirates just can't take. They don't, how do you then approach the Japanese industry or anyone in the industry to actually make this work, right? Like, that's a very difficult thing to actually achieve. So what connections did they have to actually make it work is the big question. I wonder if somebody approached them and said, hey, I know people, can we do something? Who knows? So how are you all doing this fine Friday? You've had a nice couple of days of nice weather out here after a particularly cold winter. We've had a break in the weather, and it's been very, very nice out here. Feeling good about that. So that's feeling good. I'm looking forward to watching some more anime this weekend. Well, it's a holiday weekend for us here in America, so we have we're looking forward to some time to relax and like I said, watch some anime, play some video games, work on projects like that, working on fun projects, side projects. We will see. All right, so that is the news. Let's move on to the great not the great debate. Time for dramatic reading. You know what? It is time to go back. I kind of despaired about the dramatic reading this week because I was going back to the discussions of 20 years ago, and it was all pretty quiet. They're up to like episode 20 of Evangelion is being released on tape in America, so there's some discussions about that and where the story is going. There's news about this upcoming anime series called Cowboy Bebop that people are excited about, but it hasn't come out yet. And other than that, there wasn't much going on except for this thing about Princess Mononoke. So we're going to talk about that. Welcome to the Great Debate, where I give you a dramatic... I'm sorry, it's not the Great Debate. I keep getting that wrong. Why do I keep saying that? Welcome to a dramatic reading of an anime post from 20 years ago this week. And this has to do with Princess Mononoke, which had come out about a year ago, I believe, in Japan. And there was a lot of Oscar buzz around Princess Mononoke, Hayao Miyazaki's arguably greatest film. And the thing is, it did not get an Oscar nomination. And this was considered a bit of an issue. And there was a lot of discussion about this and a thread about this sort of Oscar snub of Princess Mononoke. Now, this is way, most folks did not know what anime was in America. So the chances of anything anime getting any sort of Oscar, attention was very unlikely. But, it was possible. So that did not stop people from talking about it. And so we do have a little conversation here from somebody named Julius in a thread called Mononoke Hime Dist, Otaku Threatened to Riot. Personally, I prefer it to stay underground. Not to mention the fact that in our society, it has to be a movie to get an Academy Award. The only way an animated movie can be nominated for an Academy Award is if it were made by Black Disney. Just goes to show that it doesn't take much to keep a group of insipid, brain-dead people entertained. Why don't they try to watch something original instead of a pounded-out remake of a story that's been heard 1,000,000 times over? Next thing, Disney is going to rip off Miyazaki, just like Osamu Tezuka's Jungle Emperor Leo. Oh wait, I forgot. They bought the rights to all of his stuff. You know, I personally think they did this so it won't be seen in the US, mainly because they don't want people to see how much their stuff sucks. And as we all know, Disney made sure that no one watched Hayao Miyazaki movies ever again. Weird. Anyway, so that was the dramatic reading of the week. Pretty weird one, but then people are weird, right? Kind of the nature of things. All right, so that was that. Let us move on from that. How's everyone doing? I actually need to go and grab some tea, so I'm gonna not leave you. I'll be right back. But I got something to entertain you for a few moments.
More powerful than the pounding surf, mightier than a roaring hurricane. This amazing stranger from the planet Krypton, the man of steel, Superman. Possessing remarkable physical strength, Superman fights a never-ending battle for truth and justice, disguised as a mild-mannered newspaper reporter, Clark Kent.
Following closely in the wake of a series of baffling crimes, the body of an elderly man has just been found in the marsh flats outside the city. He has been identified as the watchman at the Metropolis munitions plant.
There's a story, or I'm no reporter.
He is believed to be the victim of an organized ring of saboteurs. More news later.
Sounds like there might be a story at the plant, Lois.
Lois? Me name is Louis, not Lois. Gee whiz, everybody interpolates me name wrong. It's Louis. L-O-U-I-S. Lois. Louise. Lucy. Now I'm so mixed up, I don't know who I am.
Okay, Watchman. Take your post in the main shop. Be on the alert. Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. Oh, pardon me.
Report upstairs, 12 o'clock. Very important. Report upstairs, 12 o'clock. Very important. wonder what the big shot wants.
That was a good job you did on the Watchman last night. Now, how about that dynamite charge under the shops?
It's wired to the switch on the plant floor below. When the new watchman pulls that switch tonight, the whole place...
Get that girl.
Let's give Lois Lane some credit there, by the way, for some pretty darn impressive, you know, acrobatics in that Superman cartoon, for not just, you know, oh my gosh, I got captured. Like, she runs. All right, so let's talk a bit about Academy Awards here, because this is, people are doing stuff and getting confused. So first off, Bruno, Miyazaki never attacked Disney senior executive teams with a katana. That is a false rumor. What happened was that when Disney got the rights to that, Toshio Suzuki, no, I believe it was either Miyazaki or Suzuki, mailed them a katana with a note in there saying no cuts. It was a gift to them and a bit of a joke, but he did not attack anyone. No. So first off, let's get back to the whole, you know, anime films being selected for Academy Awards. First off, setting aside the fact that, you know, good and great are relative terms that change over time. You know, a great film from the 30s is not considered a great film today, all that stuff. Lots and lots and lots of great films never get nominated for Academy Awards. Like, you know, the Academy Awards are not a good indicator of quality. They are an indicator of quality, but they are not, well, I should say, they are not a foolproof or even extremely effective method for that, right? Secondly, you have the problem of how do you categorize it? Is it a foreign film or an animated film? Where do you slot that in? Because those are going to be going up against very different things, and so it's a difficult thing to. It is tricky to put an animated film up against a live action film, because the folks watching a live action film are looking for particular things. You know, you cannot compare cinematography in a live action film to the colors and, you know, the way an animated film is produced. You know, you don't light an anime film or a drawn animated film. You color it, and there are similar things, but they're not the same. So, let's see here. Also, anime has never gotten a lot of buzz at the Academy Awards, so why it should suddenly get it now is beyond me. Like, this is not a thing that happens, so being surprised that it's not happening now seems kind of, you know, is not thinking things through. And I'm not talking about anyone in the chat room. You know, I totally get why it's frustrating. And I'm not saying that you guys are foolhardy. I'm talking about other people who complain about it and, you know, write long articles about it. That's what I'm complaining about here. So that is the logic behind foreign films. The other thing is that the animated film category is for animated films regardless of origin. So being animated trumps country of origin. all animated films go into the animated film category unless in very special situations. So that's, that's where that goes. And again, it gets to that whole thing that live action films and animated films are different enough in production. It is, I don't want to say it's not fair, but it is, I would argue, ineffective to put them side by side and ask somebody to compare a live action film to an animated film side by side. They're just, the processes are too different. And also, importantly, you want people who are voting on, if somebody's going to vote on an animated film and knows what they're talking about, you'd rather them be looking at all the animated films, voting on those, as opposed to somebody who's not familiar with animated films, voting on those, or somebody who is familiar with animated films voting on live action, right? It's very different stuff. Recco, it'll be published whenever YouTube decides to publish it. Not up to me. So generally speaking, yeah, if it's animated, it goes into the animated category regardless of country of origin. That's how that goes. No, YouTube does not upload in chunks. So I will upload segments of this, but YouTube will upload the entire thing as one big video. And then I will slice out the news into its own chunk, into its own video. But yes, this entire thing will be up on YouTube once I'm done streaming. And the other issue is that the Academy Awards are also the Academy Awards. They're done by a group of people, the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences, and they are looking to reward specific things. Just like the Nebulas and the Hugos. Those two awards are looking to reward certain things, and the Academy has its own stuff it's looking for. It has never been particularly interested in animated films. It took a long time to get any kind of attention to that. And that's, again, just because those people are not familiar with animated films. They are not qualified, in a sense, to comment on animated films because that's not their expertise. That's not their calling. That's not how they do things. Animation, especially in America, is done by a completely different staff. The people in the Academy have no experience with animation and how it's assembled, so they can't know how that works, but they do have experience with film and how film is assembled. So it's always been, it's why you have, these weird Academy Awards for like sound effects and audio design, because people care about those, but let's be honest, the people voting for it are rarely all that, are not experts in sound design. So they have some ear for it, but it's not going to be as effective as other things. It's why Crunchyroll does the Crunchyroll Awards. It's why there are attempts within the industry to make its own awards systems, because they're the ones who know what they're talking about. So yeah, do not look to the Academy Awards for any sort of understanding of and recognition of animation in general, because that's just not their expertise. They're about live action. That is their knowledge. Anyway, so that is that. Let's move on to... I am going to be giving away Inuyasha Bootleg Box Set 2, because why not? Discs 4 through 6, and let's see if I can figure out what how many episodes are on this. Do they say? They do not. It is some number of episodes. It does not say how long it is or anything like that. So it is just a number of episodes of Inuyasha. Right, well, I mean, the thing is, it is the American Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences. So Sunil in the chat room is saying, one could easily make an argument to normal foreign films, the main categories like Best Picture, but this is an American award, right? It is made, in Hollywood for Hollywood films. They recognize and acknowledge and have awards for foreign stuff, but that's not what they're there for. And again, that's not their expertise. The problem with that is, again, you do not want somebody who is unfamiliar with Bollywood pictures comparing a Bollywood film to, an American sitcom or an American comedy. Those are just two completely different things, and they're not going to know what they're looking at. So I'll give this away a little bit later. But first, let's get into the review, right? Because I kind of want to do a review here. Do I have... I do not. I have a thing here saying review intro. Let's see what this does.
These research studies explain how film experiences may help students learn increased amounts of new information, which is remembered longer, and which therefore may be applied efficiently to problem-solving situations as pupils progress from lower to higher grades. In the intermediate grades, the need for providing real experiences about things studied continues. Good teaching methods include the use of pictures, the chalkboard, models, and charts, usually before the learners turn to the pages of books for information. Some of the pupils can recall experiences of their own about pupas, larvae, and insects, and they can describe them to their classmates as they refer to charts like these. But for all the children in the classroom to really understand how things move and grow and develop from one stage to another, something else is needed. Something which can bring living experiences right into the classroom, experiences that are as lifelike as reality itself. What would happen if sound motion picture films were added as study materials in this classroom?
That was fun. All right. I'm here to talk about Girls' Last Tour, an anime series from 2017 that aired on Amazon Prime Video internationally. It's an odd one, a very odd anime series. It's based on a manga that ran in an online magazine starting in 2014 and ending in 2018. I'm not sure if the anime series shares the manga's ending or not. Just don't know. It is sort of a post-apocalyptic slice-of-life comedy, is the best way I can think of to describe it. It focuses on two girls of indeterminate age, seem to be teenagers, who are traveling through this war-torn environment that seems to be completely deserted of humans. It seems like all the people have died in this conflict. They do very rarely come across other people traveling through, but it is 95% of the time, well, 90% of the show is them alone, the two of them, traveling through looking for food on this Jeep, this type of sort of all-terrain vehicle. It's very odd because the art style has very much kind of these moe blobs, but the environment is this war-torn industrial area. Very odd. The animation itself is simple but very effective because the character designs are simplistic. They're able to move them a fair amount. The detail doesn't get in the way. And there's a fair amount of movement as they're interacting with their environment. You're not going to see a lot of really highly detailed action sequences in this. There are a few sequences of essentially running from danger kind of stuff, but it's definitely not an action series. It's much more of a just living your life, going day by day kind of a thing. Despite the concept, it's very laid back in a weird way. Also want to point out an interesting thing here in terms of the animation. The vehicle they're on is CG rendered, and when the characters are on the tank, on the vehicle, it's not a tank, there's no weapons, they are rendered usually in CG as it's moving around. And they do an amazing job of matching the CG to the drawn characters. You will not notice a difference when they move. Now, much of the time when you see those movements, they're a little further away from the camera, but there are certainly shots where you can see quite a bit of detail, and you would not tell that that is a CGI rendered version of those characters versus the hand-drawn. So good job there. It is hand-drawn, both characters and backgrounds, other than the CGI vehicles. Really, really impressive work there. The characters are not always on model. They shift around a fair bit in the show because the style is kind of loose. I think that works. I was never pulled out of the show particularly by that, but occasionally the eye shapes are a little bit weird, or the body shapes are a little bit odd, so just be aware of that. Overall, the direction in terms of the editing and the cinematography is simple but effective, much like the animation. There are every few episodes, they will spend a lot of time on one sequence, an extended sequence, that is very carefully edited and assembled, and where there's a lot of cutting between various elements, and it is very well done in that sense. Much of the time, it is what I'd say utilitarian editing, where you're cutting back and forth between different characters. There's a lot of interesting use of camera angle, but nothing experimental, nothing odd, nothing that kind of pulls you out of the story, nothing where, okay, we're going for this weird angle just to be different. They keep it grounded in that, in kind of an effective way for a slice of life show. Now, being slice of life, the characters are really important. So you have two main characters, Chi-chan and Yu, who are shortened versions of their names, and it kind of reminds me a lot of traditional Japanese comedy, especially the two-person comedy style. I forget the name of it off the top of my head, where you have sort of a straight man and a comedic actor, and they're bouncing off each other with their comedy. One of the girls is more straight-laced and more responsible, while the other is more laid back and explores things and gets into trouble and that kind of thing. It's that dynamic in these characters. And I think they did an impressive job with this in terms of those are very cliched character types, but they sell those characters in the situation, especially because the laid-back character isn't doing things that are really, really stupid. She does things that are a little dangerous because she just doesn't fear things, but it's not, it's not crazy suicidal stuff. It's not over-the-top goofy stuff in a way that doesn't really make sense for somebody who is surviving in this apocalyptic world. It's just somebody who figures things are generally probably going to work out okay. So that's kind of interesting. And the responsible girl isn't, it's so common for that person to be unfun. And this girl is definitely straight-laced and definitely trying to keep the other girl from getting too, from going too far. But the personalities aren't extremes; they're just personalities. I think that's the big difference. It's easy for this to become the odd couple, where one person is just a slob and one person is extremely organized. This is just two different personalities, and that definitely comes across in the dialogue. Every character has their own way of speaking, their own word choice, how they get things across, how they interact with people is very distinct, which is important in a show with very, very few characters. And I think they got that right, where you hear a line of dialogue and you think, okay, that sounds like you, that sounds like Chi-chan. So good job on there. Now, they are exploring this weird kind of, it's not post-apocalyptic in the sense that there's been a nuclear explosion, but it is in the sense that there's this war that seems to have killed everyone, on Earth. So the overall believability of the show is a little, it's a tough one. I can totally see a lot of folks watching this and just not getting it and just being completely turned off by the premise, especially because it has that slice of life dynamic, but also because there's an abstractness to the world. One of the conceits is that because there's been all of this war and all of this industrial building for the war, you had these massive, massive cities that were all turned to war production. Everything is about the war. So you have these massive factories that just take you days to travel through in terms of just the scale of them. And so as a result, these facilities are not particularly, visually complex. There's a bunch of pipes and a bunch of machines. So there's this very utilitarian sense to the world, which makes sense, but can be a bit of a turnoff, I think, for some people visually. I think they do a good job of, and as they travel through, they come to different environments, but they're all still these utilitarian military environments. So good on them there. I listened to the Japanese dub. As far as I'm aware, there's no English dub of this, and I think they did a fine job of the voices in it. I think they fit the characters quite well. They're a little bit squeaky at times. They're a little bit, anime high-pitched character voice at times. But overall, it doesn't get in the way, and I think it makes sense for an anime series like this. It's kind of the way these things are. Also want to give a shout out to the music. Music is gorgeous, good variety of tones to it, but always appropriate to the show, and sometimes appropriate in unexpected ways, where they'll be exploring this complex environment and this kind of dangerous environment, but the music will be light-toned and kind of communicates to you that this is not as dangerous as it appears. They are scared, but you shouldn't be. And I really like that. And other times when the music is more dark and scary. So good on them there. Definitely, instrumental sort of a score, an orchestral kind of a score, but toned down and appropriate. Which is interesting, because for a show like this, you could do something very, very weird and industrial. You could use electronic music. You could go very spare, because everything else is very spare. But they went with a more lush soundtrack, which I think helps bring the viewer in a little bit, right? I think if it did that, the show would feel sparse. It would feel a little bit off-putting. And I think that helps the viewer to feel a little bit more reassured. Especially with the concept of, like, these characters could die at any time. I mean, it'd be very easy for them in these environments to be, killed off. So, FYI. Overall, this is a show with a very weird vibe. On the one hand, it is that they are trying to survive in this wasteland. On the other hand, much of the show is about them having little arguments and bonking each other on the head and arguing over rations, and one of the girls likes to eat a lot, and all that all the sort of normal slice of life stuff you get in a slice of life anime series is in here. So this is not going to be a show that you're not necessarily going to just love, and it's not necessarily a show, importantly, that your friends are necessarily going to love. You may know folks who are like, oh, I think they'll like this. Good chance this might not fire on all cylinders for them, so be aware of that. I should also point out there are some more serious moments in the show. There are sequences that are philosophical, that are thoughtful and relatively deep. So that is in there if you're looking for that as well. Just kind of few and far between. So be aware of that. That is Girls' Last Tour. It is, I believe, 12 episodes available out there, as I said, on Amazon Prime Video, at least, as of this recording. And if that sounds interesting to you, it is certainly an unusual show that I think you will find interesting. Okay, so that's the review. That was fun. Let me check the chat. Yeah, I think it's an APC. It's like an alternate vehicle kind of thing. It is actually it is a vehicle. Like they posted things where it is based on a real vehicle. And yes, these all get uploaded as regular reviews later on YouTube. Thank you. Yeah, I'm trying to keep up with new anime. I'm hoping this weekend to finish Land of the Lustrous. Love to finish that one up this weekend. Yeah, no, absolutely, Fisher. It's what I like is the characters aren't archetypes; they are personalities. Yeah, it's very, very weird. Why do people care about the Academy? Well, I mean, the reality is that the Academy does sell. If your movie is nominated, and especially if it wins an award, it makes more money, and all the people involved become more famous, right? So, like, the Academy is important kind of socially and culturally, I would argue out of proportion to like its efficacy in choosing quality. On the other hand, like, name any institution that is good at choosing quality, right? Anytime, any sort of review thing is going to get lots of things wrong and weird and that kind of stuff. So I am, I think, 3 episodes into Land of the Lustrous, only that far. And I wanted to finish Girls Last Tour and other stuff. So, yeah, the Academy's give it up on independent films, I think. They let Sundance have independent films. That is just, again, I think the Academy's just not good at understanding independent films. That's not their expertise. But yeah, it's Girls Last Tour is a weird show, and even by anime standards. But you know what? You guys hear that? I think it's time for something. It sounds to me like it might be time for something. I think it's time for the giveaway! Yay! It's time for the giveaway! Let us give something away. Why not? I think it is time to give away, and let me adjust my levels a little bit. I'm a little hot tonight. There we go. So yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and give away Inuyasha to somebody in the chat room. And I am looking at the chat room. And as usual, I'm looking at the top of the chat room to see who's at the top, because that way it's a little bit more randomized and looking at whoever's posted right this second. So in about 10 seconds, I'm going to give away this to whoever's at the top of the chat room. 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Fisher, congratulations. You're at the top of the chat room. You will win. It is Inuyasha, not Inuyashiki. So congratulations, Fisher. Hey, Game Escape. So Fisher, if you could go ahead and, I think if you're in the Discord, go ahead and shoot me a PM with your address, your mailing address, and I will ship this out probably tomorrow morning. So congratulations, Fisher. Well done. I think it's time for congratulations. All right, well done. That is the giveaway. All right, so let us go ahead, now that that's done, and move along to something a little bit more, involved. There it is. Do I not have a thing for the debate? I should at some point. I'll do that at some point. That's okay. All right. So I want to talk for a bit. You won. Congrats, Fisher. Let's talk about fantasy anime. It seems to be a big trend right now that there's a lot of anime set in fantasy worlds. I should point out, not just science fiction, not just, weird fantastical things, not anime where fantastical things happen in the modern world or in some version of the modern world, but where characters are thrown in or live in a recognizably fantasy world. And that is a thing. Abi Rao in the chat room asked whether we're talking about fantasy or isekai. And I am actually not familiar with that term. So I'm going to look it up real quick. So in this case, I'm speaking specifically. So isekai means transport to another world shows or concepts. So I'm talking about transported to another world where that other world is fantastical, right? Where there are, you know, swords, orcs, goblins, fantasy mecha, things along those lines. It doesn't have to have orcs or swords, but where, you know, it has to be not just, you know, an alternate version of the current world, right? Not a shard of current reality. It has to be a recognizably different world. Also, I am talking here about, there it is, particularly about, related to this is the trapped in an MMO genre, which I would argue is not this, but is related in the sense that, you know, I think that is feeding in to this trend. But we had Grimgar Fantasy and Ash, where the characters are definitely transported into a, you know, fantasy world. There's no indication they're in a video game per se. And then you got like Record of Grand Crest War, where it's characters in a fantasy world, right? And so it seems like this is becoming a thing, a trend. Isekai, right? And, you know, I mean, medieval is a tough word because it's like, well, you know, El Hazard is not medieval, but I would argue it fits. I mean, maybe it is medieval, Middle Eastern, but yeah, it's hard. It doesn't have to have magic, but it almost always does, because why not have magic? Which is one of those things. But then there have been at least 2 anime series where a portal opened up to a fantasy world from modern Japan, and like the government knows about it and is deliberately sending people from the modern world to this fantasy world through a stable portal. So you have that as well as a concept, and it just seems kind of interesting. Yeah, Gate, right, being one of them. So there's this whole thing where certainly, you know, compared to mecha, there's a lot more of these recently. Compared to, oh gosh, I mean, I'm not seeing that many sports anime these days. They're certainly out there. You know, sports anime are always out there. But we're certainly not overwhelmed with sports shows at the moment. We certainly seem to have, you know, anime in there. And so the question is, why is this popular now? Why are we getting shows set in a fantasy world? Particularly because you have to create the fantasy world, right? This is not cheap. That's, you know, always follow the money. And the obvious answer usually is, okay, it's less expensive. Well, this is not less expensive. Yeah, I have not seen a rise in sci-fi anime. There are a few more sci-fi anime now than there were, I would say, in the 2000s, but it's certainly not spiking in a huge way, the way fantasy seems to be that way. So it doesn't seem to be related directly to sci-fi. Now, it's hard to tell, obviously, why anything is. There are always many different reasons, and some of it is just trends, right? If one thing becomes popular, other people copy it, so it becomes a trend. You know, one thing leads to another. It's not that everyone sat down and said, let's make fantasy anime. Lots of different factors involved. But we're certainly seeing it more often now. And what I want to bring up is this question that people argued a particular argument around the slice of life romance shows of the 2000s, the visual novel adaptations and such, the, you know, modern romance stories, canon, all those things. And they argued that at the time, because Japan was going through an economic malaise where the economy was growing a bit, things were okay, but things really weren't accelerating out of the economic bust of the 90s, you know, as rapidly as folks wanted to. And there was a rise in hikikomori and neets and social trouble you know, and then we had the whole problem with the Shinrikyo incident, which shook up a lot of people. So the argument back then is that all of these modern romance series were anime fans wanting to kind of retreat to a modern fantasy, right? A fantasy in the sense of, wouldn't it be awesome to be a young person surrounded by cute members of the opposite sex and trying to decide which one of those I want to end up with in my life. You know, a harem anime series or a reverse harem anime series is a very easy, you know, kind of fantasy to indulge in. So the idea is, kind of in terms of the national zeitgeist, that's what people kind of wanted to imagine. And they were kind of reverting back to high school years, kind of imagining what it was like back in high school years when things were easier than they are when you're an adult, right? That's the argument. I mean, I don't necessarily agree with that analysis, but I think it's an interesting argument. So now the question is, is a similar trend going on right now with anime? Are all these fantasy series similarly an easy escape for people to imagine, well, I can understand the modern world, but I can understand a world of knights and orcs, right? Well, I don't agree with that because I always find it suspicious when people say this is when people make arguments about a national character. I don't think those ever hold water. I don't think a thing is popular because all of the people in this race or this country believe this thing or want this thing, or that, you know, a large percentage of them do. I think things are popular for multiple reasons. Things are successful for multiple reasons. It's rarely because of a trend in national consciousness, right? That's just not. That's almost always a specious argument, and also it's always dangerous saying those things from the outside, where, like, I know things about the Japanese economy and Japanese education system, but I'm no expert on those, you know, and I know what anime says about this. I know what certain people have said about those systems, right? But I don't know really what that system is like in the real world practically. Also, importantly, remember, you know, the Japanese educational system in Japan is not what it comes across in anime. It's usually not what it comes across in articles written about the Japanese educational system, because people writing those come to it from a certain perspective where they're trying to prove a certain point. You know, reality is not the way it's often presented to us in media. So that's the problem. Yeah, I'm saying it's certainly much more nuanced than that. And that is, you know, in other words, I'm saying that is likely a factor. It is likely a serious factor. But, so, I'll put it this way. It is like saying the American Civil War was fought over slavery. You know, that war was fought over a number of different things, some big, some small, of which slavery was definitely one of the biggest, if not the biggest factor. But there are lots of other things going on there, you know, that you will not understand that conflict unless you understand all the different things going on politically and socially at that point that led into that war. That's what I'm saying. So, retreat into fantasy, I think, is an interesting perspective. The question, though, is if we're talking about fantasy anime, are they really retreating anywhere? Is fantasy a useful retreat? And the reason I say that is because fantasy can. One of the reasons people generally write fantasy and read fantasy is to understand a completely different system. You know, a system of government, system of politics and forces. You know, when folks world build a sci-fi or fantasy world, there's a lot of work involved in that. So it's not necessarily simpler. It is usually less complex, just because you have to fit it all into a show or a novel. but I'm not. I'm I'm not convinced that a fantasy series is necessarily simpler in that way. Well, JBEXUS, but those are tropes of fantasy, right? Those are not necessarily tropes of anime in general. But let's think. I mean, I certainly hear what Karyan's saying, that harem is easier to sell in a fantasy setting. That's certainly true, and it's also increasingly true as it's becoming harder to sell a world where, half a dozen girls are all interested in the same guy. That's just... it's, again, easier to create a world in which that is a thing. And in which, the guy is literally important in some world-shaking way. You're absolutely right, Spinterwin. We are not out of the slice of life harem anime era. Although on the other hand, I think we've always, you could argue we've been in the harem anime world since Urusei Yatsura, right? We've had harem anime, although harem really came in the 90s. But this thing has been around for decades and decades. And certainly slice of life has become, again, I'd argue there are certainly slice of life anime back in the 80s and in the 90s, definitely slice of life stuff back in the 80s and 90s, but it became it became a major trend in the 2000s, and it's certainly with us to here. And it's one of the complex things is that, right, there's a difference between this genre is now part of the industry and this genre is now the bulk of the industry. Right, I think that harem became a thing in the 90s, and now we're always going to have harem as a trope. It will sort of come in and out, but it's always going to be integrated into the anime industry one way or the other as a thing. So, I don't think we're ever going to. I don't think we'll ever be out of that, but I don't think it's going to be, a defining element of anime, right? Right, it comes down to relevance. It comes down to when anime changes, is that a fulcrum around which it changes, right? Haruhi Suzumiya was a changing point because it was taking moe trends and pointing in a different direction and saying, okay, here's this whole moe harem thing, but let's tell an intricate story within that. And when that was happening, the fact that moe was the trend, and that's kind of what they were having fun with in Haruhi Suzumiya, proved that moe was a major relevant trend, right? I would certainly. I've seen very little Steins Gate, but Steins Gate's definitely science fiction. I don't know how harem it is, but it's absolutely science fiction. Yeah, I don't know how you have a series about time travel and not classified as science fiction. That's interesting, Bruno. Isekai sells an idea of a common person in competitive Japan in a setting where their modern knowledge makes them overqualified. So, Spin, I'm not arguing that Steins Gate is not harem. I'm saying it is also absolutely science fiction. Right? I mean, because the premise, the premise is science fiction. That may be a relatively minor element, but right. But I like that idea, Bruno. I think that you got something there, definitely, where bringing modern knowledge to a fantasy setting is empowering. And I think that also works into our earlier comment that if this is about sort of escape, and it's about trying to get to a different world, it's not just about, oh, I want to be in a different setting. It is saying, actually, this stressful environment is an advantage. You know, all of the things being thrown at me actually make me a more effective person in at least this other context. I think that's very wise. That's a really great point. And it would be an interesting evolution of that idea where, you know, kind of regressing back to high school and the idea of being surrounded by cute girls or guys is fine and fun, but it is kind of this regressive fantasy. Right? Whereas that is an evolution. It's saying, as a programmer, as an office worker, as somebody who's gotten ahead in life, as somebody who started a family, you now know how to handle yourself. You're seeing this in a lot of these manga where you're reincarnated as like a slime or a goblin. That is absolutely true. People are using that past experience to make them better in this new life. That's really interesting. So JPEGSIS is saying, maybe the fantasy genre got stagnant, so producers are just taking anything that are new or unique. They know it sells, they got really nothing to lose. That's an interesting point too. I think that's also true that fantasy has always been a through line in anime. There's always been fantasy anime series, to one extent or another, going all the way back to Sally the Witch in '66. So yeah, it's out there, but I think you're right. I think it did get to a point where it's like, okay, fantasy kind of is fantasy. What can we do with it? Yeah, I think you saw that in Record of Lotus War, where it's like, let's bring D&D tabletop style fantasy to anime and see where that brings us. And that created a whole little subgenre, and that definitely changed things around. Wait, sometimes it's about knowledge. And yeah, it's sometimes about tropes. I think it's also, to that point, about being an otaku. The people involved... Sorry, one second. I've got a little fly that's bumping around. Yep, Berserk's a fantasy anime series. But Berserk in Japan, as a kind of a side note, definitely fantasy. Berserk in Japan is acknowledged as a manga masterwork, so they don't really, you know, the anime doesn't have to be remarkable, right? It's like adapting, what's a good example? Wuthering Heights, you know, or Of Mice and Men, or whatever, where you can make an adaptation of that, but no one's expecting that to be the definitive version of that thing. The book is the definitive version of that thing. So Berserk's in a weird place. The same is kind of like with Akira, where everyone's like, the Akira anime film is amazing, but we know the book is this ridiculously massive thing that no one's ever going to adapt effectively, right? So Berserk's weird. But yeah, to your point, Spin to Win, there's another aspect of that where it is people bringing their otaku-ness, and I mean that in the broader sense, bringing their expertise as a fan of the genre to that genre and understanding where things, how things work and how things should work. Contrast with, for example, Grimgar, which is kind of the opposite of that. It is about saying you don't know what you're doing, you don't have these tools, and you have to adapt. And so it's about being adaptable, which has been a very interesting thing to argue. If we argue that a lot of this is about bringing your expertise and about bringing your skills to the party, Grimgar is very much an inverse of that, and I wonder where that would fit into that whole analysis. And you're right, Bruno. Medieval settings in fiction they don't reproduce really any of the politics, any of the power struggles of actual medieval life. I'm actually doing a lot of research on this right now. I've been reading, and here's a recommendation for you. The Time Traveler's Guide to Medieval England is a very useful little book by Ian Mortimer. And this is basically, it doesn't quite pretend, it doesn't get in universe, but it says, if you were to travel back to medieval England, here's how that does not conform to your expectations. And here's how to really live with how things, really worked back then. There's also a series called Life in a Medieval Village, Life in a Medieval City, Life in a Medieval Castle by Franz Gies and Joseph Gies. I'm probably mispronouncing those as well. Let me try getting out of the way of that, see if it can... Doesn't want to focus on this. Apologies. Weird. Oh well. George R.R. Martin uses this series a lot, or used it a lot for researching Game of Thrones. And you're absolutely right. You know, fantasy is not medieval Europe. It is this convenient, weird, tropey amalgam of simplifications, which again makes things kind of simple. Now, the funny thing is, especially in literature, fantasy literature, but also more broadly in speculative fiction, one of the reasons you do speculative fiction is because you use the world to comment on something. You are simplifying the world because you want to hone in on one aspect of that and focus on that for your novel. So you don't want all of the realism, because the realism would take half the book to explain. I'm not seeing that so far in fantasy anime. I'm not seeing them use the fantasy series to make a big comment about how society should function, about how people should function, besides the normal, shonen style tropes of we should all work together. So I wonder where that fits in terms of whether that's... I think it gets back to what you were saying earlier. Who was saying that? JPEGSIS, what you were saying, that I think it sells. Fantasy sells. And so, again, follow the money. So we'll just use those tropes, but we'll use that setting and go from there. How do I distinguish between space opera and light science fantasy? Jack Saba asks. Well, space opera is definitely science fiction. You're certainly right that both of those are, I would argue, are science fiction. I use the term science fantasy to refer to a series in which the setting has the tropes and structure of a fantasy story, but it is set in the future, right? So something has happened, post-apocalyptic or whatever, and people now live in a roughly feudal society with horses and farms and so forth, and there's no high technology, but it is 1,000 years in the future. I consider that to be science fantasy. Whereas to me, space opera is weird because it's a very imprecise term, I argue. To me, space opera is distinguished from other things by one very specific word: scale. Space opera must be big. It must involve the fate of large numbers of people, ideally whole planets of population, and it must be epic, right? In that sense, I don't think so. For example, from what I've heard, or from what I've seen, the new Solo Star Wars movie that, as of this recording, we have trailers. The movie hasn't come out yet, but that wouldn't be space opera, right? It's about the big stuff's happening, but it's not about the death of planets necessarily. That's how that goes. So to me, light science fiction, for example, is just can have a lot of the trappings of space opera or vice versa, but light science fiction doesn't have to be epic. It doesn't have to be, and so to me, space opera is operatic, right? It must feel like opera, where this is huge in scope. Now, granted, opera typically is not necessarily about the death of nations, but the the term space opera was pulled from opera in that sense of being massive in the sense of its scale. So I think that's how that goes. So Spin to Win says, Anime Today are not really trying to comment on anything, they just want to pad out the runtime. I disagree. I think there's as much anime commenting on life and reality, and there are as many people trying hard in anime as there ever were. You know, it's Sturgeon's Law. Right? I have seen one episode of Legend of the Galactic Heroes, Sunil Shah, and I found it boring. So I cannot help you with that. The person who recommended it to me said you need to watch the movies first, I think. Because like the first movie is a condensed version of the first, I don't know, however many episodes. So watch that and then go back and watch the series after what happens in the movie, apparently. But I haven't gotten there yet, so I don't know. Well, science fiction involves, science that's fictional. Stuff that is based on science, but that is not possible yet with our current science. And so it doesn't have to involve us having that science. It can involve other people using that science on us. But that is kind of, to me, always the fundamentals of science fiction, is that there must be some relation to recognizable technology. And when it's not, it's not. Which is why, like, Tenchi Muyo, for example, is sci-fi. You could argue it's science fantasy-esque. Again, it depends on how you define science fantasy, and I would, yeah. But it's, we don't have this ridiculous technology, but the technology exists out there, and so it is used on us. I mean, I would actually argue that Tenchi Muyo is more fantasy than science fiction, but yeah. Exactly, Karyan. Space opera versus science fantasy is like an opera versus standard play, in my opinion. Standard plays can be about big stuff, but it's not opera. Right, it's like anything, there is Game of Thrones coming out right now, and there are insipid sitcoms coming out right now. All these things are going in at the same time. See, I'd argue that Star Wars is science fiction. I mean, I think the term science fantasy is broad enough and you're not locked down enough that, I think if somebody says, no, it's science fantasy, sure, that's fine, right? That term is just weird enough. But, and I would definitely argue Star Wars is science fiction. Well, no. See, here's the problem. Star Wars started as, really space fantasy, in the sense that, Star Wars is Flash Gordon. It was based off Flash Gordon. Flash Gordon was science fiction. It just folks weren't they weren't aware of how all this stuff would work. So it was optimistic science fiction, right? Star Wars took that one step further, but then we have this weird thing where lightsabers were not science fictional devices. George Lucas never meant for lightsabers to be realistic devices. We have since sort of retrofitted to say, well, you could have a tube of plasma, that you could construct a lightsaber using known technology, but the elements in Star Wars were not meant to be science fictional in that sense, right? And you have the Force, which was meant to be a mystical aspect with some scientific grounding. And by the way, midichlorians were in his very early notes for Star Wars. Like, he always intended for there to be some, genetic component to the Force, in the sense that, there was some kind of thing which made some people Force sensitive or not. It wasn't, in other words, he wanted to make sure that the Force wasn't completely mystical. But it's definitely a magic system. It is meant to be magical. And yeah, and so yeah, that's kind of complicated. Where it is, well, really, it is an Arthurian legend married to Flash Gordon. It is classic fantasy, mythical story elements told in a Flash Gordon universe. And it's one of the reasons why Star Wars is really weird to analyze from that sort of realism perspective or that kind of categorization perspective, because it very much was two very different things thrown together. And it's why people often get Star Wars wrong. Because, you can't just make a science fiction story set in Star Wars universe and make it feel like Star Wars. Or vice versa, right? Film genres have always been applied afterwards. Genres in general have always been applied afterwards to a work, or to a set of works, after they were created and put out into the world. William Gibson did not sit down at his typewriter and say, I'm going to invent this genre called cyberpunk, and wrote this novel and said, this is the first cyberpunk novel. These books were written, and then folks said, there's this weird new pattern, let's call it cyberpunk. That's, how that works. Genres have always been a tool of reviewers, really. Initially, to be able to categorize, to say, well, I like this, I don't like this, I need a name for those things. Yeah, and so that, and not to get too deep into this, and not to piss people off about this, but that is why Rogue One for me did not. Rogue One is set very effectively in the Star Wars universe, but did not feel like a Star Wars story, because it has none of the mythic tropes. It has none of those operatic elements. Those, Joseph Campbell mythic structure elements that Star Wars has. So it felt like this very odd this odd disconnect in terms of the hero's journey. Very entertaining film, but they just kind of didn't miss they kind of missed that aspect of Star Wars to me. Which is not to say that every Star Wars movie or every Star Wars thing has to be space opera. Right, and I would argue Rogue One was not meant to be space opera, but that's where that disconnect happened for me. Same thing actually for Force Awakens and Last Jedi, where those movies are not they're not heroes' journeys. None of those mythic elements are there in those movies, and that's why people are having these weird reactions to it, because it doesn't have the structure that 4, 5, and 6 had, or even that 1, 2, and 3 had, where 1, 2, and 3 made their own mistakes. But they were building those mythic elements up to weave into the other stories, whereas now those threads are just all going everywhere. So, and again, I enjoyed Force Awakens: The Last Jedi. I was thoroughly entertained by those movies. They're just taking a very different tack to space opera, to the hero's journey. I hear you, Van Riley. Yeah, I think light science fiction is a good term for Star Wars. And again, I think space fantasy is accurate in the sense that it is those two things. It is kind of science fiction, it is kind of fantasy. I just like the term space fantasy for medieval setting in the future. But who knows? Oddly, I've asked this question going back to the 90s. I haven't found a generally accepted term for those stories where it's set in the future, but there's little or no, technology. Technolize is definitely science fiction, not space opera. It is certainly operatic. Technolize is, but it's certainly not space opera. The funny thing about Technolize is it has aspects of cyberpunk in terms of tone and in terms of a lot of the themes of cyberpunk. There's no hacking, there's no None of there's no giant corporate control. But I think in terms of that sense of delving into questions of identity, who a person is, especially in a massively technological society, I think it definitely has those cyberpunkish elements. Don't worry, no spoilers, Spin. Just talking about themes and tone. So yeah, I think Technolize is a good example of a show where it is science fiction, and it doesn't neatly fit into any of the subcategories I can think of. Until everyone dies at the end. Kidding, kidding. But yeah, it's like, what is Serial Experiments Lane? Right? Is Lane cyberpunk? Arguably. But she never hacks anything that I can think of. There's really no hacking at all. There's very little in terms of delving into cyberspace. I mean, cyberspace is part of it. There's no giant corporate control. There is a weird, there are weird, powerful corporations, but it's not really about sticking it to the man. It's not about those things, but it is about identity, right? So it's a very weird mesh of elements. It is science fiction, but it's not really any of those other pieces to it. I don't know. All right. So, yeah. Oh, actually, I should switch back. So thank you very much for that discussion. I think that was very helpful about fantasy. I don't think there's any really good answer one way or the other about this. I think it's just that is a thing that's happening in terms of fantasy being a trend, but I think we've found some very interesting trends to that. So thank you. We're not done. I just wanted to put a period on the end of that sentence. Yeah. Good question. Low or high fantasy? I would argue it's all high fantasy. I can't recall a low fantasy anime series that have I ever seen low fantasy? Wow. That's a really interesting question. I can't think. See ya, Fisher. Thanks. Remember to send me your address so I can mail out your Inuyasha. Thanks, JPEGSIS. Appreciate that. Wow, yeah, I think it's all high fantasy. I think it's all big stuff. Now, again, some purists would say that high fantasy has to have certain elements that anime doesn't necessarily have, but well, yeah, you're right, Spin to Win. There are folks who just absorb anime through their pores. I will say, a lot of the folks I've come across who are like that, they watch anime in the sense that anime is always on, but they're not necessarily watching it. Like, they have it on while they're making dinner, while they're on Twitter, while they're doing other stuff. Let me find, I think, 1 second. Oh, I have it right here. 1 second. This is for everyone. So this is the link to the Discord. If anyone's not on the Discord, go ahead and jump in there. And I will try to answer any questions you guys have. And I'm generally, I generally notice what's going on in Discord. I'm not always there or answering every single question. But if you hit me up, I generally get a little notification, and I'll see it at some point. So go there to join the Discord, and I often announce things on the Discord, and we have some conversations there. One of my goals for 2018 is to increase the level of conversation in the Discord as a place for, kind of time-shifted discussion, where you don't have to be there at that moment, but somebody can ask something, somebody else can throw in a reply, and we can kind of discuss things over time. So yeah, I think a lot of folks, you know, who watch huge amounts of anime, they're just kind of, it's just kind of there, but they're not paying attention to it. And also, unfortunately, they tend to burn out. They do that for a couple of years, and then they leave anime and never come back again, unfortunately. So Bruno says, there's a lot more realistic depiction of contemporary life in anime now. Am I wrong? Even more than fantasy. To me, it seems like anime transition from pulpy sci-fi to normal TV. I mean, it depends on what you mean in terms of time scale. So I would absolutely argue that pulpy science fiction in general was kind of the big thing for the 80s and the 90s. And then there was a pretty hard shift to contemporary life in the 2000s and moving into this decade as well. So certainly on that time scale, I would agree. But I wouldn't say there's more contemporary stuff in the past couple of years than there was, 5 years before. But yeah, definitely over that time scale, it shifted. And again, maybe it's because of stuff. I think also part of it too was economic, was the fact that it was cheaper to make those slice of life shows, and that's all you can do, right? You're welcome. Thank you, Fisher. Thank you for being part of this. Yeah, Orange Sakura Quest, definitely. What is interesting is we are seeing some shift in that, where we're seeing, like, I'm fascinated by citrus. I didn't really like what I saw of episode 1. I have strong issues with citrus, but the fact that it's modern day, but with one or two weird changes, some elements of that school just are wild. So I'm wondering if that might be a thing where there's modern but weird. Would mind sparing my thoughts on Nier? I'll be happy to talk about Nier. But yeah, so in general, I think that slice of life or just kind of contemporary shows are, again, just kind of, they have been a big genre for years. So Nier. I love Nier Automata, and I had to stop playing it. I was kind of forced to stop playing it. Nier is exactly the kind of video game that I wanted when I got back into video games, where it has a few little tropes in there, but it knows that the tropes are there, and it is using those tropes in the telling of its story. It is also, there is a lot of subtext. There's a lot of, one of the things I love about Nier is that on one level, it is this story of, androids fighting in this war in the future. But pretty much every element in there is saying something. And you can go pretty nuts with all of the textual cues and why is this character this, why is that character that. But it is fascinating to me how much of that is there and how much the game does sort of ask questions, and kind of throw things at you as to why is that there? Why, it is definitely dealing with the consequences of these concepts, of these very anime concepts. Hey JPEG says, I stream every Friday night at this time, about 9 to 11 Eastern time, 6 to 8 Pacific, and then scattered throughout the week, I also do like video game streams and so forth and so on. But yeah, anime stuff every Friday. The problem with Nier is that I got to a point where they disabled all my weapons, and you have to walk from one part of the map to halfway across the map, and on this timer, you go half speed and then full speed, and you can jump or you can't jump. And that timer gets shorter the longer you travel. And the bad guys are scattered all across this area. So you can't fight back, you're just traveling, and there's a period where you're next to these cliffs, and there are these enemies all around the cliffs, and there's no way to avoid these enemies. Worse, it's 3D, so they're, depends on where you get them, they're around, like, there's no specific pattern to where everything is. You can say, okay, I get here and wait, and I get there and wait, and I get there and wait. No, they may have shifted over here, depending on how the random number generator made that happen. So, I tried that, I don't know, 5 or 6 times in a row to get through that area, and I got to this one point, and they just kind of ganged up on me, and I got thrown over the cliff. And I can't find any tools to help with this, and when I look online, people say, yeah, just get through it. Just walk until you, find a way, basically. There seems to be no, solution. There's no key to it. And I'm just like, I'm stuck. I just keep dying over and over, and I can't find there's no cover at this part of it. So I don't know. So I stopped. And there are several points in the game. This is at least the second time in the game when they just remove all of your weapons from you, or almost all your weapons from you, and restrict your movement, and then tell you to play the game. And to me, that is a cardinal sin. I get really, really frustrated when games say, here's all this stuff you have earned over time. I'm now going to take those away from you to make the game arbitrarily difficult. Let me solve your problems with the tools I have earned. So yeah, I don't know what I'm doing wrong, but I can't get past it. I just get thrown off a cliff every single time. So yeah, that's kind of frustrating. And again, if it was like really difficult enemies and it was just like I need to get good, that would be fine. But I don't know. So I'm stuck on Nier, and that's, I don't know, maybe 2/3 of the way into the game. There are like 3 acts, and I got through the first 2 acts, and this is just at the beginning of the 3rd act. So it's roughly 2/3 of the way in, and I don't know when I'm ever gonna get back into that game because I don't know how to solve it. But I love the themes. I love the designs. I love the fact, so I accidentally unlocked a trophy for looking up the main character's skirt 10 times. Because there's a point where I was trying to jump up and the camera angle kept looking up her skirt, basically. Have I tried cheesing the RNG? I have no idea what you're talking about. What does cheesing the RNG mean? 1 second. So we had a warm day, and it's really, really, it's gotten warm in here, so I had to cool things down. Are they fun? No, they're all robots. It's the larger of the robots, particularly, but also there's and those are like near the waterfall that you have to sort of walk past, and then after that there's a large cluster of the smaller robots, and if I can make it past the bigger ones, and often I can, the smaller robots just swarm me, and I'm on this little path next to this cliff, and one or the other always gets me. Yeah. I've cussed. I think that is the only time I've cussed on air. Maybe once or twice others, but yeah, that was very, very frustrating. And again, it's not that the game is terrible. It's that particular approach of removing things from you. Die until the RNG generates a more tenable way to get through. Well, I tried it 6 times in a row, and every time I did, that happened again. So and I mean, they're all in roughly the same position. And here's the other problem: is that you're on a timer, and the longer you wait, the longer the periods in which you are moving at half speed and can't jump are. So you can't just stop and wait for things to move, because if you stop, then you can't move as fast, right? That's a problem. I have not tracked down footage of other people beating it yet. Honestly, it's one of those things where, here's the other problem. There are 20 other amazing video games sitting on my PS4 and a dozen other games on my Switch that I could be playing otherwise. So, you know, I unfortunately, that was enough to where I was like, I should spend more time investigating other things, and maybe someday I'll, you know, I will be less frustrated, but it's like that's not a cardinal sin, right? It's not the worst thing in the world to happen, but like, I've got other things to do. You know, I got an hour into Horizon Zero Dawn and haven't gone back to bed. I got Final Fantasy 15, The Last of Us. I have all the Uncharted games I've never played. They're sitting on there. I bought all of them. You know, there's all of these games that I'm like, I could be playing those. Firewatch. So yeah. Unfortunately, Nier is much further down the list now than it used to be. So I'm like, you know, how much time am I going to invest in figuring out this one part of the game versus just playing a game that would also be useful to know about? I don't know. Sorry. Phone is buzzing. So yeah, unfortunate. But definitely an amazing game. You know, one of those things where, yes, it amazes me too. In any other year, it feels like to me, as somebody who doesn't have much experience with video games, Nier Automata would be a game of the year. Like, it would be an easy, it would at the very least be in game of the year discussions. And the fact that there were all these other games that deservedly were game of the years, and it got kind of pushed out of the game of the year discussions, except for, you know, it often won like best soundtrack, which it deserves. But that's amazing to me. Yeah, well, you know, you know, The Last of Us is also really good. And Firewatch is also really good. And Journey is also really good. So I've got to just live with that for now. And again, doesn't mean I'll never come back to it, but yeah, it's true, Bruno. What I meant is, I should have said that, you know, in many places, Nier didn't even get on those lists. They got on a lot of them. But it did not win many GOTYs, which, understandably, I mean, gosh, sorry. Breath of the Wild might be my favorite video game of all time. You know, twist my arm, but my gosh, I've put more hours into Breath of the Wild than just about any other video game I've ever owned. And yeah, that is an amazing, amazing experience. So I totally get it. Totally get it. So I'm hoping this weekend. Actually, I can tell you. Let's see here. I actually have a list of video games that I want to play next. So I will probably this weekend play either Armello or What Remains of Edith Finch. I have both of those on the list. Have you ever had somebody get angry at me for a review I made? Yes, absolutely. Particularly the Gundam Seed Destiny review. Or not, it wasn't a review. The Gundam Seed Destiny video. It got all sorts of terrible comments. You can Google it and you can look at the comments. I deleted all of the like really, really angry stuff. The just the nasty, you deserve to die kind of stuff. I don't think it ever got quite that bad, but it was I got some very, very nasty comments on that one. I do not have Persona 5, no. I'd love to play Persona 5 too, but Persona 5 unfortunately is one of those games where it's just long, and I'm just not willing to do it. I will probably wait until Persona 5 comes down in price dramatically, and then I'll grab Persona 5. But I'm not going to get to it anytime soon just because of the length and the scale of that. I'm trying to kind of work up to the point where I can play, a good couple of hours of video games on like Sundays and work my way through some video games, and so then I will actually have time to play these video games in large chunks. Hey, Halifax. But yes, and I mean there have been other reviews I've done where I've had a lone comment of somebody saying, STFU, you have no idea what you're talking about, all that kind of stuff. Generally, I delete that stuff. You know, if it is just somebody saying you're an idiot and you don't know what you're talking about, like that's not furthering the conversation, and it's not, you know, it's not useful to anybody. So yeah, that was you remember that was fun. But yeah, so it's been, you know, random things here and there. Fortunately, I have curated my YouTube comments enough that, and I've actually, I know I've missed a few YouTube comments here and there, but because my comment section are clean, you know, because they don't have all that stuff on there, I don't get a lot of negative comments. You know, folks don't pile on, which helps. Radiant Historia Perfect Chronology. Cool, I've never heard of it. But yeah, it's sad. I mean, YouTube comments are YouTube comments. It's a problem. And the other problem is even the positive comments for much of the time was just, yeah, I agree. Which is nice, but like there was no discussion, right? There was no, I thought this as well. So it took a while to get those. Yeah, well, that's interesting. I mean, I disabled the comments on the Seed Destiny video, but I think that's the only video where I disabled the comments. So that's interesting that YouTube is now, I mean, there are even one or two others where I disabled the comments just because it got, you know, nasty. But they've been open on everything else, I think. At least, you know, I've kept them open, but YouTube may have been blocking them. I need to shut this down. Sorry. My phone keeps buzzing at me, so I will turn that off. Bayonetta 1 or 2, yeah, I wouldn't mind doing that. Yeah, I just bought today Uncharted 4, Super Meat Boy, and I'm no good at platformers, but I want to get that experience, and it was on sale for like $2. So I'll play Super Meat Boy. That'll be probably one of those things where, you know, I play it for an hour and never play it again. Just because I'm not a platformer guy, but it'll be a good experience. And I think one or two other games where I'm like, that's a classic. It's worth picking up for. Oh, Titanfall 2. That they got a big sale on that, and again, I wasn't into video games when that came out, and I'm like, yeah, I'll give Titanfall 2 you know, a few hours and see how that is. One of the other nice things is that I am totally okay with buying a game, you know, deeply discounted and spending, you know, a couple hours with a game that I bought for $20 and saying, okay, that's fine. Like that was my entertainment. That was you know, I spend much more than that on anime, and I'm totally fine with that kind of price to entertainment ratio. So I don't need to play through all, you know, however many hours the Titanfall 2 campaign is. I can enjoy it and then move on. Right, exactly, Spin. It's harder to express why something is wrong in a factual, constructive manner because it's a subjective opinion. And let's be honest, it's not hard to poke holes in an argument on the internet when you have infinite time to do so, or when you have a lot of time to do so, and any argument you come across will have holes in it. So it's like, well, you know, yes, that person is wrong. I can deconstruct that, and no one will ever read it. Or maybe 3 people will ever read it, and they may or may not agree, and it's like, well, yeah. I mean, it's really hard, and then of course people can poke holes in my argument because my arguments are never perfect. So yeah, it's really weird. Excuse me. Yeah. It's one of the reasons why I don't do much on YouTube in terms of commenting on other people's reviews and debating with other people, if you will. You know, I don't do reactions to other people's reviews because it's like, well, that's their opinion, and I could, you know, I could discuss it, but it's like, really, what is that accomplishing? I don't know. So who knows? Not that there's, you know, not that there's never a time to do that, but it's it's less often is it useful than we think it is, right? Not that much fun, or not that useful. So I was thinking of doing some Otakano cooking and making some mac and cheese. Although I know I made mac and cheese on Otakano cooking a couple of, like maybe a month or two ago. But I just haven't made mac and cheese in a while, and I have a bunch of cheese in there. So what do you guys think? Do you want me to make mac and cheese? Or I can make some cookies or scones or something like that. Nothing too complicated tonight. We've been going for a while. But I could do something quick. What do you guys think in terms of a quick cooking stream? Or nothing. I mean, we could also do something else or stop here or whatever. We don't have to do a cooking stream. But I know I mentioned it. So if anyone's feeling, or if the chat room's feeling particularly strongly one way or the other, we can certainly go in that direction. Yeah. And that's the other thing too, is, I mean, arguing these things takes time. And it's like, who wants to spend huge amounts of time debating these things with people and constructing a good argument and all that stuff? It takes enough time to construct a good argument about, a review you're trying to make to be something constructive. I know last time when I was doing mac and cheese, I think I did equal parts dairy, pasta, and cheese. But if the chat room is feeling really strongly one way or the other, let me know. Otherwise, this actually might be it for the night. Yeah, I think folks have kind of checked out at this point. All right, so I think that is the message. All right, well, in that case, rather than trying to push through and kill myself, we'll go ahead and end there for the night. Thank you all very much for joining me, as always. I'll be doing a video game stream on Sunday and playing around with that stuff, and we should be back to the regular streaming schedule this coming up week. The drawing practice on Tuesday, workshop Wednesday on Wednesday, all that stuff. No Kit Bash tomorrow. I've got other stuff going on, unfortunately. This weekend is Katsucon, and I'm going to be going down just to see a friend at Katsucon. I won't be doing panels or I don't think I'll have a lot to talk about with Katsucon because I'll just be there for an hour or two. And that's probably gonna block away my Saturday. So, yeah, sorry, Halifax, but this is the end of the stream. So, thanks, as always, everyone. Appreciate you. You guys are the reason I do this, is because I get people who I have good conversations with on here. You guys are smart, and you guys have helpful conversations. So, thank you all. Yasumi Nasai, and I will see you, if nothing else, next week. See ya. Oh, wait. I have a cartoon to end with. We'll end with a cartoon. Let's go out on a cartoon. Why not?
Many years ago, when the people of Israel were a great nation ruled by King Saul, they fought a long and bitter war against their ancient enemies, the Philistines. In those days, soldiers used swords and spears and bows and arrows, and they wore heavy armor and carried shields to protect themselves in battle, so that only the biggest and strongest men were taken into the army. Well, in this war, the Israelites and the Philistines were pretty evenly matched. They fought many hard battles, and each side lost many men, but neither side could completely conquer the other. Then one day, while the Philistines were camped on one side of the great valley and the Israelites on the other, there came out of the camp of the Philistines a champion of their cause, a huge giant, taller and stronger and bigger than any man anyone had ever seen. He wore very heavy armor, and his face was fierce and cruel, so fierce and cruel that it would strike fear into the hearts of the bravest. This was Goliath, the giant of Gath. He strode from the center of the valley, faced the armies of Israel, and in a voice like thunder, he hurled this defiance at them. I am Goliath, the giant of Gath, and the Philistines have chosen me as their champion. You, soldiers of Israel, choose a man for you, and let him come down here and fight with me. If he kills me, we will be the servants of Israel. If I kill him, you will be slaves to the Philistines. I defy any man to accept my challenge. When the men of Israel saw Goliath and heard his defiant challenge, they were afraid, for they had no one to match his size and strength. Not one among them dared go down and do battle with the giants. Not, that is, until the shepherd boy David heard Goliath's challenge. Now, David was just a boy. He knew nothing about swords and spears and fighting wars. But he was a thoughtful boy, too, and a good boy, because he believed in God and trusted in him. So, when he heard Goliath defying King Saul's army, he turned to his brothers and said, "In defying the army of Israel, Goliath defies God. Is there no one here to go out and do battle against the enemy of the Lord?" David's brothers were first surprised and then angry at him. "Go back to your flocks and leave wars to fighting men." But David wouldn't be put off. "I will do it," he said. "Send word to King Saul. Tell him that I will go down into the valley and do battle with Goliath the giant." When the king saw how determined David was, he gave him his blessing and offered him his own royal armor and sword. But David wouldn't take them. He wasn't a soldier. Instead, he went to a nearby stream and selected 5 smooth stones. He put these in his shepherd's bag. He took his stick in his left hand, and in his right hand he held a slingshot. That's all. With both armies looking on, excited and expectant, David went down into the valley to meet Goliath. They met in the middle of the valley. David looking up at the giant, confident and unafraid, and Goliath looking down on the unarmed boy with eyes full of hatred. Suddenly, the giant Philistine roared in a terrible fury. "I have defied all the armies of Israel to give me a man to fight, and they have sent a boy against me. What? Am I a dog that you come against me with a stick?" David answered him calmly. "I come against you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. Your sword and your spear and your shield will not save you, Goliath, for this day you shall learn that the Lord fights on the side of right." Goliath let out an angry snarl. "So be it. Defend yourself, boy." Goliath the giant rushed forward to make quick work of the boy champion of the Israelites. David stood his ground. He reached into his shepherd's bag, took out 1 stone. He fixed it in his slingshot, and he let it fly. The giant was dead, and the simple shepherd boy, who trusted in God, had done what all of King Saul's army hadn't been able to do. David lifted his eyes to heaven, and he whispered a prayer.